Well, good afternoon and happy Sabbath to everyone. Hope we're all having a good Sabbath, and again, greetings to those who are watching over the internet. Hope you're also having a very fine Sabbath day. Well, here in Cincinnati, we have a pretty day. It's sunny, it's a little cool, but it's pretty. But the weather is gradually turning as we move from winter into spring. We're getting more rain now. Of course, we've gotten a lot of rain recently, but a lot of rain instead of snow, although obviously winter's not over yet. And maybe we will see some more snow. That remains to be seen. But we're trending into the warm direction. Spring is only about 2.5 weeks away. 4 weeks from today is the first day of unleavened bread. That means that 4 weeks from today, we'll be sitting in services here on the first day of unleavened bread. I believe the services are here. At that point, the Passover will be history. It will be past. The night to be much observed will also be past, and as I mentioned, we'll be sitting here in services on God's holy day. It will be here before we know it. This time of year is a busy time of year for us. We have our annual preparation for the Passover, for the days of unleavened bread. Also, things happen. All sorts of things happen. As long as I've been in the church, the spring feasts, when time leading up to the feast, have been a busy time of year. In fact, a very busy time of year. I might even describe it as hectic on certain occasions. It's a busy time for us. But as we approach the spring feasts, this is a reminder today that we need to plan for the feasts. We obviously just don't show up on the day of the feast, show up at services. It takes planning. It takes preparation. And I'm encouraging all of us now to make our plans, to begin planning for the spring feasts. We need to prepare physically for the feasts. We need to prepare spiritually for the feasts. And I'm sure we'll hear more about this preparation as we move through time towards the various feasts. I'm giving this message now so that we can begin our advanced planning, so that we can look ahead to the feasts. I'm sure some have already begun in their de-leavening, in their preparation for both the days of unleavened bread as well as preparing for the Passover. As I say, some have begun, but all of us will need to prepare within the next few weeks for these days. So now is the time to begin planning and then preparing for the Passover and for the days of unleavened bread. I want to talk first about the days of unleavened bread, and we'll look at the instructions to keep the feast in the book of Exodus. Turn to Exodus, the 12th chapter. I'll start reading in verse 15. That's Exodus 12, and in verse 15, we'll see the instructions that were given regarding the days of unleavened bread. I'm going to talk first about physically preparing for the feast. These are the instructions. Exodus, the 12th chapter, starting in verse 15, it says, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses, for whoever eats leavened bread from the first day unto the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. Dropping down to verse 17, it says, so you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on the same day I will have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. Dropping down to verse 19, for 7 days no leaven shall be found in your houses, since whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he's a stranger or a native of the land. In verse 20, you shall eat nothing leavened. In all your habitations you shall eat unleavened bread. So here we have instructions that these are throughout all our generations. No leaven is to be found in our houses, and of course we're not to eat any leavened products. Turn ahead to 1 Corinthians, the 5th chapter, and we'll see that these instructions, we'll see that the New Testament church continued keeping the feast, which I know is not a surprise to any of us here. But it's always good to rehearse this and to renew this in our minds. 1 Corinthians, the 5th chapter, I'll start reading in verse 6. And of course, this is written by the Apostle Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles. And he was writing to a Gentile church, and he's talking to them about God's feast days. 1 Corinthians 5, starting in verse 6, it says, your glorying is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? And of course, this is an analogy that has special meaning during the days of unleavened bread. Continuing in verse 7, therefore purge out the old leaven, get rid of it, that you may be a new lump, since you are unleavened. For indeed Christ our Passover was sacrificed for us. Verse 8, therefore let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened of sincerity and in truth. So these are the instructions that we're to keep the feast, we're to continue to keep the feast, and no leaven should be found in our houses or wherever we may spend most of our time. Could be our houses, it could be where we work, could be our car. Wherever we would have leaven, we need to get rid of it. We need to clean it up. And I'd like to just give a few things to consider as we plan and as we go through the de-leavening process. Some things that have occurred to me recently, or perhaps not so recently. But one thing to think about, is just say a hint in the de-leavening process, if you will, is removing leavening is not spring cleaning. De-leavening is not spring cleaning. What do I mean by that? Well, obviously, when we're working on getting the leaven out, leavened products and crumbs, we need to be very thorough. We need to remove all of it and all traces of leaven. But that's still not spring cleaning. De-leavening is not cleaning all your windows. Probably it's unlikely you're going to have leaven on your windows, and obviously if you do, it needs to be cleaned. But you don't need to clean your blinds or your ceiling fans or go up in your attic where no one has been for a couple years. De-leavening is not spring cleaning. Now, I'm not saying spring cleaning is wrong. Maybe our windows, they should be cleaned. However, that is not de-leavening, and usually we're busy enough at this time of year where we don't have to worry about our spring cleaning. We just need to, quote unquote, worry about unleavening. A second thing to think about is ingredients. When we go to the store and buy something, to start reading labels of what's in the various packages. Joy and I were in a store this last week, and we bought a big-size container of cereal. And it's more than we would use or consume, by the time the days of unleavened bread are here. So we read the ingredients. Is there any leavening in here? It turns out, it's fine. But we need to start looking at things like that. We need to look at all sorts of things. We need to be diligent. A couple of years ago, I bought some chocolate candy, and I was checking the ingredients, and sure enough, there's leavening in there. Now, I don't know what you would leaven with a piece of chocolate candy, but anyway, we need to be diligent to make sure there is no leaven in our homes. Something else is kosher products. Kosher products. Just because something is labeled kosher doesn't mean there's no leaven in it. I have seen matzos where it's labeled on the box, kosher for Passover, and yet there's leavening within the matzos. So that's something else to be careful of. And just the last, I'll say, hint, whatever to throw out, is as far as our garbage is concerned. I've mentioned that there are 4 weeks between now and the first day of unleavened bread. Well, if your garbage is picked up on a Monday, you really don't have 4 weeks. You only have 3 weeks and perhaps a couple of days. Because cleaning your house and putting in your garbage and then leaving your garbage in the garage, waiting to be picked up on the following Monday, that won't work very well. Either you have to plan ahead and make sure your garbage goes out on that Monday with the leaven in it, or you need to dispose of your leavened garbage some other way. The easiest way is to make sure it goes out with the garbage man. These are just a few things to think about in planning and looking ahead and preparing, say, physically for the days of unleavened bread. Perhaps you've thought of other things while I was up here talking, various things that have occurred to you, along the way. And of course, the second way we need to prepare is to prepare spiritually. I talked about preparing physically. We need to prepare spiritually. And this actually is the most important way to prepare. Look again at 1 Corinthians 5, verse 8. It says, therefore let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened of sincerity and truth. Leaven is a symbol. It pictures something to us. It has meaning for us. It's not a meaningless house cleaning ritual. It has meaning for us. It's symbolic. It's much more than a house cleaning ritual. It's more than a reminder of God bringing Old Testament Israel out of Egypt. It's symbolic for us today. Again, it has meaning and has purpose for us today. So this is the way we should be thinking about as we de-leaven our houses, as we de-leaven our cars, wherever our workplaces, wherever we may de-leaven. We need to think about this, as we're cleaning, what we're doing and why we are doing it. The second, this continuing on in preparing spiritually, is preparing for the Passover itself. Turn ahead to 1 Corinthians, the 11th chapter. 1 Corinthians, the 11th chapter. And I'll start reading in verse 23. 1 Corinthians 11, and then verse 23, where the Apostle Paul says, "For I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the same night in which he was betrayed, he took bread." And of course, this night is the beginning part of the Passover, and he was keeping the Passover on that night. Dropping down into verse 27, it says, "Therefore, whoever eats this bread or drinks this cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord." So this is a pretty serious matter. Verse 28, "But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of that bread and drink of that cup. For he who eats and drinks in an unworthy manner eats and drinks judgment to himself, not discerning the Lord's body." So this is talking about the manner that we take the Passover. It's not talking about us being worthy or not being worthy. Actually, for that matter, none of us are worthy. You're not, I'm not, no one is worthy to take the Passover, but we can take it in a worthy manner. And the way we do that is by examining ourselves first, by giving us a spiritual checkup, if you will. And also it's praying about this, asking God to help us in this process. It's like going to the doctor, getting a yearly physical checkup. This is a yearly spiritual checkup, although I will imagine that we do give ourselves a checkup more than once a year. So we certainly should be doing this more than once a year, but especially we are told to do it now at this time, to examine ourselves and then to keep the Passover. Verse 30, it says, "For this reason," in other words, those who were not discerning the Lord's body, "For this reason many are weak and sick among you, and many sleep. For if we would judge ourselves, we would not be judged. But when we are judged, we are chastened by the Lord, that we may not be condemned with the world." So overall, the purpose is positive. It's not to beat us down. It's not to think, how bad we've been for the last year. One of the things we could do is, make a comparison. I was here last year, I'm now here this year. I've made some progress. Hopefully that's the case. If we haven't made some progress, well, that's something that we need to work on. Likewise, we can look for perhaps new areas that need our attention, things that we need to do as far as part of the self-examination process. Something else that we can do at this time in preparing and, again, helping us in our examination is to study one of the Gospels. I know a lot of people like to do this, to go through one of the Gospels, look at the life of Jesus Christ, and, again, think about our preparation in the process. Other people like to look at the book of Job or go through the book of Job. Some may look at specific passages, such as prophecies of Christ in Isaiah or in Psalms. And also I'll mention that, our booklets. United has, our Holy Day booklets, but in addition to that, on the website, there is an abundance of material about the Passover and Days of Unleavened Bread. There's a lot of good material that we can look at, will help us in our preparation process. So, brethren, as I mentioned, Passover and Days of Unleavened Bread are approaching, and as I said, they'll be here before we know it. We need to prepare now and up till that time, both physically and spiritually, in order to properly serve God and derive the greatest benefit from his feasts.